Before we get into this episode, there's something that might be of interest that I wanted to tell you about. Scene and Heard, who run this podcast, have been asked by Scotland Food and Drink to undertake a strategic review of the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards. Now, these Excellence Awards have been going for almost 20 years and are a huge mainstay of the food and drink sector. But it's time to ensure that they're still relevant. So if you have ever been involved in the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards, or even if you've ever had an opinion about them, we would love for you, please, to complete our survey. So if you go to the OnFARM Twitter, which is at @on_farm UK, and click the link in the bio, there will be a tab in there that will take you to the survey, and it should only take you a very short while to complete, but we would be enormously grateful.
Happy New Year! It's Monty here for our first 2022 episode of OnFARM, the Food, Agriculture and Rural Matters podcast. I hope you all had as restful a time as possible over the festive season, and I hope you're all raring to go for 2022. Unfortunately for many of us, the year started with a bit of bad news, as we had to announce that AgriScot, rescheduled from November and due to be held on February 9th, has had to be cancelled in the face of Omicron. The SAOS conference, which is another event our Scene and Heard team are heavily involved in, has also now been postponed to a new date of 31st of March. So, this all got me thinking. Farming, as it always does, is facing some major challenges at the moment. The loss of AgriScot in particular means we will miss the opportunity to debate, discuss and learn from these challenges. We do not, as yet, have certainty regarding government policy for future agricultural support in Scotland. However, we do know that the bottom line of many farming businesses is likely to be exposed to the vagaries of global markets in a way that hasn't been experienced since the UK signed up to the CAP almost 50 years ago. So, in 2022 here at OnFARM, we are going to make it one of the key themes of our pods, looking at how rural businesses, particularly farms, can increase their financial sustainability. We will hear voices from the next generation of farmers discussing their views on policy and hopes and aspirations. We will hear from diversified businesses, including those selling direct to consumers and those who have diversified into agritourism. We will dig out valuable advice from agri-professionals and innovation and best practice from the length and breadth of Scotland, and occasionally further afield. To kick things off, we are going to take up the challenge thrown down by George Eustice, DEFRA Minister, who recently told farmers in England that in future they should stand up to supermarkets. My initial reaction upon hearing that was probably similar to many of you listening, and it's unrepeatable here. However, if this is to be the direction of travel, at a UK level anyway, then we really need to get our heads around what standing up to supermarkets actually means and how it may be done. With this in mind, we are planning a February episode of OnFARM, which will be a panel discussion on how farmers can grab a fairer share of the pie from within the supply chain, not just supermarkets. If you have a view on this, please do get in touch via Twitter at @on_farm UK or Google OnFARM and grab our email address from the website. You might even win a place on the panel. Now, for the rest of this week's episode, I want to play in full a discussion that Anna had with well-known dairy farmer, industry commentator and SAOS Vice Chairman Rory Christie. It was one of our most listened to episodes and is particularly relevant now. George Eustice at Westminster may have said, "Stand up to supermarkets," but Rory, speaking to Anna here on the OnFARM podcast, gave us all some practical ideas about how we might just be able to do that.
So we're in the North Persalic Dairy Parlour. It was commissioned in 2020. It's a 60-point Delaval rotary, and it's a specialist grassland version, because the kind of dairy farming I do is pastoral, mob grazing, much like you'd see in New Zealand, but developed to cope with challenges that the climate of South West Scotland throw at us. you want to know a bit about our business?
Please, yeah.
So our business was formed in 1954 by our grandfather and grown by my father. And now my brother Gregor and I own and run the business. Gregor has a brand new, or built in 2013, pig unit for 200 sows, and we finish all the progeny for bacon through Scotland. We're a small marketing co-op of which Gregor's on the board. I look after dairy cows. We've got 1,000 at the moment. We have had as many as 1,500. They're our two main income sources, I guess. We also have a small Christmas tree enterprise and some cottage rentals, and we sell suckler replacements from the dairy herd and a little bit of what people call bull beef from the dairy herd, and lots of calves, occasional dairy replacements.
And I have travelled down to Wigtonshire to chat with you today. We've got the right equipment, so we're sitting 2 metres apart because we're still in COVID restrictions. Obviously, during lockdown, since March, you've not travelled off the farm very much, but before COVID, you were travelling up to Edinburgh quite a lot. Can you tell me a bit about your off-farm activities and what you're involved in with various committees and boards?
Yeah, over the years I've done a lot with NFU Scotland. I swore that I never would. My grandfather and father were heavily involved with both what was the milk board and then the union, and I saw the time they put into it, and I saw the pressure it created, especially when they're away from the farm, and I swore I would never do it. But a guy called Jimmy Mitchell, who was NFU Milk Committee Chairman, persuaded me to come and help, and at that time there were some very charismatic people involved like James Withers, and I got involved in trying to help dairy farmers move away from the very bad situation in terms of milk price and milk price contracts. I then got involved in what was called the voluntary code of practice, and I worked closely with a guy called George Jameson and Kenny Campbell at the time, who was the milk chair, and we ended up anyway. I was in the negotiating team to create what was called the voluntary code of practice. Eventually I was the farmer signatory on it, but I learned a huge amount at the time. The key learning was that I basically realised that farmers needed to work together, cooperate better. I had started to work with our milk buyer, Lactalis, on their what they call direct supply committee, myself and a chap called Peter Simpson, a great friend. And we very quickly realised how poor a representation of the farmers it was. It was shocking. Really, it was just a puppet organisation for so that the company could meet its corporate social responsibility needs. Anyway, through the work with the union, I realised I needed to change that direct farm committee, make it accountable, make it independent, and I get help from SOS, Scottish Agricultural Organisation, in particular a chap called Hamish Walls, who's helped me ever since. And to cut a long story short, we formed the committee, as it was at the time, into an association and then a full-blown co-op, producer co-op. So we have what is now called the Milk Supply Association, which I believe is now highly regarded and respected for what it does, and it represents all the farmers that supply Lactalis to the factory in Stranraer where our milk goes to make cheese. It's independent of Lactalis, it's financially independent, democratically independent, as a small board of 8 of us all together. We have to be voted at the position. So we represent the farmers' voice. So that led me to doing more with SOS, and I guess today I try not to go to Edinburgh too often, to tell the truth. COVID's helped that, because a lot of it can be done by Zoom. But if I'm going to Edinburgh, it's to see SOS, which I think is a fantastic organisation. Probably quite a quiet organisation that people don't realise just how much good work it does. But between MSA and SOS, that really is what takes up a lot of my time.
It struck me, I know you don't necessarily use the word negotiation, but all of these conversations are about listening, and you've listened to Lactalis and what they need as a global organisation. But more importantly, I think, is that you and the work you've done with the Milk Suppliers Association is enabling them to listen to you, to understand your needs and what you want. Is that vaguely true?
It's vaguely true, yes. It's vaguely true. Listening
Does
is
it in a more eloquent fashion, because that's what we're here for. You're the one that's eloquent when it comes to this topic, not me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you step back. One of the other reasons I go to Edinburgh, spent time in Edinburgh, is because I also trained as a conflict resolution mediator under the careful guidance of Core Mediation and John Sturrock QC, who's quite an amazing man, really. John advertised a course, as he does every year. I think it's called Mediation and Negotiations, the Route to Conflict Resolution. And I thought, here, this is something I need to do. I need to do this because I've got to negotiate with this big company, this global giant. And I've got to get better at what I do. I've got to be as good as the guy at the other side of the table.
Yes, yeah.
And I went to that, and it was a really, really intensive 6 days, I think, doing this training. It cost me a lot of money. It was quite an expensive course, $6,000, but it was the best value I've ever had. It was possibly the most influential continuous professional development, if you want to call it that, I've ever done. I learned how poor I was at listening, and how poor most people are at listening.
Yes.
When you're at a committee or whatever, a meeting, how many people are actually listening? They're sitting at the table thinking about their next answer, not listening, butting in, coming with their opinion. John's classic is that I get 2 ears and one mouth, use them in that order. They re-taught us how to listen, they taught us how to question, how to understand the body language, to question and understand people without actually speaking, to build rapport, to organise a room so everybody's comfortable. So I came out the other side of that, not this mega negotiator to be able to beat down like Talis, but with a better ability to listen to them, to ask questions, and to try and find different ways, different solutions. That's the great thing John and his team taught, is that there are always other solutions. It's never ever the best outcome you get. Hopefully it's not the worst, but it's probably the realistic outcome that you're seeking. So when we're dealing with Lactalis, who are a global giant, hugely powerful in our supply chain, as is many of the milk processors, the farmers are in a poor position in terms of balance of supply, often because there isn't simply enough milk. Supply and demand is often in favour of the processor. So it's a buyer's market, and it certainly is at the moment. So we have to find alternative solutions. It's not always about having the best milk price. It's not the best ever interest of our farmers to walk away from the table. But we do have to hold companies, and it's a huge, huge problem in our world today. Yes. Capitalism of the shareholder type is a big problem because very little regard is given to the stakeholders in the supply chain. I see it as my job to try and get the best deal for the stakeholder, the farmer. And Lactalis often don't want to get. They are not alone. I am not deriding Lactalis as a big baddie. They're just a selfish big capitalist companies. And that's a fact of life.
And obviously the milk sector is not unique. You presumably have had similar conversations with arable farmers, with farmers who've perhaps got tenancy issues to discuss. This imbalance of power is the same across every sector of agriculture. And how do you think the skills that you've learned, if learnt by many others within agriculture, could help every sector?
Yes, everything I have learned and everything we do, the Milk Supply Association, could be copied for other sectors. So often people are completely blinded by what they want. They can't listen, can't think of an alternative, don't want to face their own reality. So much in every problem is personal. Regardless, the biggest company, the biggest global company there is, it always comes down to the personal behaviour of the person you're dealing with. And 9 times out of 10, they can't or don't want to lose face. They don't want to lose face, whether it be in front of their boss. They don't want to lose face because they couldn't bring their bonus home to their wife. So once you start to understand the personal aspect, understand the person, then you can start to make inroads to the problem. And of course, there are many people on the other side of the table who are trained to understand that. And so they make it even more challenging for me and for others. And the tenancy sector, huge issues with landlord-tenancy relationships. That is truly personal for the tenant often, but similarly with the landlord. And basically there isn't enough money in the system for either. So often that creates an impasse. When there are very rich, wealthy landlords, then they need to consider their power and how they use their power. Because that's what it's about. It's always about power and how you use it. And if you find somebody at the other side of the table who lacks integrity and is prepared to abuse power for their own selfish gain, it's going to make the solution really difficult to find.
Now, how would you advise somebody who's not sitting across the table from somebody enormous, like a huge landowner or Lactalis, but somebody who's struggling with day-to-day discussions, whether it be staff members or what have you, but on a slightly smaller scale, because it's something that we all face every day?
The opposite of the relationship with the big global company is the relationships we all have at home. And I found myself during that course thinking about my relationship with my wife and my kids and how I make a complete and utter arse of it often. The truth of it, you can be highly trained as you want, but yet at home the difficult conversations are still hard to do. And I remember John actually saying, you can be a really good mediator, but you still need help to mediate yourself.
Yes.
And so it is, again, as I said, personal. And if we start off by listening, trying to remove the passion from the discussion, that's often very difficult if you're a passionate person like me. Remove the passion, remove the emotion, and walk in another person's shoes. Look down from the balcony upon the scene, if you can imagine that. If you're standing up above watching yourself, imagine yourself watching the discussion. You'd probably be mortified with yourself for a start. If you recorded the discussion you have with your wife, your partner, how embarrassing if it played back. Yes. What a twat you were. Rachel will be going mad if she's listening to this, because she's realised how much difficult a person I am. But, at home and dealing with your staff, go up on the balcony, look at it, understand from the other person's side, walk in their shoes, try and understand their view, then alter your argument to suit. Maybe you'll find a solution. Maybe you don't like the solution, but that's because you're not able to face the reality. You then have to think about the reality, think about the outcome that you actually want.
So I guess no matter how fantastic the John Starrett course was, your learning would have continued apace after you finished that course, when you actually started to apply what you'd learnt into the real world, I guess. Not just with the likes of Lactalis, but as you say, at home, negotiating with your children about something. So I guess it's about the real life stuff where you apply this knowledge that you really start to grow. Would that be fair to say?
I think so, yes. I think that absolutely. Maybe the thing I've done different or feel differently about is I guess I'm a lifelong learner. I didn't do much at school, really. Mum and Dad had a difficult marriage, and education maybe wasn't top of my priority at the time. And I've learned on since then, and education is also, or exam results are no indication of intelligence really. I do absolutely believe in education and schooling, and my kids, I hope, will be able to put themselves in a position that they have choice, so they can make the decisions in the future with ease. But yeah, so I desire to continue to learn. So yeah, you do a course and it gives you a buzz, it gives you an intensity to your learning. I've also had a lot of coaching over the years, and I seek out coaching, one-to-one coaching, life coaching, because I'm never good enough at what I do. Every day we move on to another problem and you need more skills. So you just got to keep learning. So I would advocate to anybody, you've got a responsibility to yourself to keep learning, to challenge yourself. Never be a victim. Get on, sort your problems out, take them with the bull by the horns. and keep learning.
I found an article about that you had in the Scotsman, I think, which was to do with the Milk Suppliers Association, and a quote from it is, which maybe you'll have to tell me when I finished, maybe sums up this conversation, and that quote says, "I remain firm in my belief that old school aggressive relationships achieve little. The inequalities in the dairy supply chain need to be addressed by developing trust, solving disputes and building collaboration." Now, you could probably take out the words dairy supply chain from that sentence. It sums up all relationships, and particularly in a business sense, collaboration, trust are probably two critical words, are they?
Absolutely, yeah, they are. I mean, I still stand by that statement, and it's really difficult to get genuinely good collaboration. Really difficult at times to have respectful dialogue, respectful conversations. The supply chain has got power imbalances, and so until we can start to solve that, and that'll be driven by the consumer actually taking responsibility for their actions. I mean, we could start talking about a whole different subject around the health of our planet and global warming and the thing that farmers can do for it. And I have a huge concern that everybody just wants to blame somebody else and not take their own responsibility for what's happening to our planet at the moment, the loss of biodiversity, the greenhouse gas thing. I really think farmers can become the heroes, not the villains of it.
Yes, I agree.
But people need to listen to us. And those farmers that will need to change, many of them, what they do. We need to apply science and history. But ultimately, while we keep cheap food as a driver of our economy, we won't save the planet. It's absolutely straightforward as that. We've got 60 harvests left. I recommend anybody watch Kiss the Ground. It's a tremendous film on Netflix.
Yes.
And people should really watch that and understand that there are things we can prioritise, and carbon capture being one of them, putting the carbon that we've released as humans back into the ground. Farming can help with that really very effectively. But how we produce food going forward cannot be about done at least cost. It cannot be asking farmers to constantly do more for less, because that is the capitalist model, and the capitalist model that we have today running our world is killing our world. And I'm not saying, I'm not some kind of mad left-wing socialist. What I'm saying is we need to step away from shareholder capitalism as the driver of our world economy, and we need to take some consideration of the stakeholder, and the planet being one of those stakeholders. And so it's so difficult to deliver trust and collaboration in a supply chain that's driven by constantly asking us to do it for nothing, less than the cost of production. It's just totally unsustainable in the purest form of the word.
And from a consumer perspective then, what do you think needs to change?
You need to ask questions and demand. I don't think food needs to be terribly much more expensive, but there are huge inefficiencies in the supply chain, huge waste, and many of these global companies are just taking money away for shareholders, vast salaries and vast hidden dividends being taken away, because there's a huge problem with tax regimes in UK and States and Western world, where it's very possible for grey accountancy to make a company pay very little tax.
Yes, that's what we've regularly seen.
And so the money goes out the top, and the supply chain uses the farmer's land holding to be able to borrow. So they leverage the farmer's capital. The farmer puts himself in more debt and continues. The Dutch in particular call it the race to the bottom. You're in the commodity trap. You invest to be more efficient. The efficiency gets taken away from you, but from the processor and the retailer. And you go again till somebody goes bust. And then the farmer gets bigger, and the farmer gets bigger, and the production becomes more industrialised. Meanwhile, the shareholders are taking the dividends, and the money's going out the top. So the consumer needs to understand this. The consumer needs to ask questions about the integrity of the companies they're working with or buying from, And then they need to really start to genuinely know where their food's coming from, how it's made, and the production system that's using it. We can't feed the world by going back to sort of low output, organic type farming. We need to use
about the noise. What is that noise, Rory?
It's the compressor.
Oh, right.
Runs the dairy going off.
I see.
We really need a mix of science, of organic farming, of conventional farming, to be able to produce food in a way that will not only feed people really well, but also save the planet. Food needs to be seen as medicine. We have huge problems with diabetes, with obesity. We need to face that and not just go to the NHS and get a gastric band.
Yeah.
If we could change the diet habits of people, eating habits of people, diabetes, if you put a cost in diabetes, and I can't remember the figures, but if you could halve the number of people with diabetes in the country because they ate properly, because their doctor knew about food, food is not on the it's not taught in medicine. It's not taught at university.
No, you're right, and I have a GP friend who is furious about that and trying very much to change it. But yeah, you're right. The diet and nutrition is not taught.
And the prescription needs to not be medicine as we know it, pharmaceuticals. It needs to be healthy food and exercise. Then when food starts to be seen as medicine, and you pay a lot of money for medicine, you'll pay a huge amount to pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies are some of the richest companies in the world, huge lobbying power. Imagine the stuff that you shove over your throat every single day being the thing you pay the least for. It's absolutely mental. It's upside down. But guess what? Those big global companies taking the shareholding out, lobbying governments to make sure, because if food becomes the cure, then they're not needed to the same extent.
No, exactly. All of the junk gets ditched.
Yeah, the junk food gets ditched. You know what? Plant-based food is really taking off at the moment, and it is being what's the word I'm looking for? It's been funded by these huge multinational global companies, whether they're pharmaceutical, whether they're current food processing companies. Not because it's better for the planet, because there's vast margin in plant-based food. The plant-based milk, if they call it shouldn't be called milk. As Jack Whitehall said, it's not juice. People are drinking nut juice. Nut juice is water and squashed nuts with something horrible put in it to make it taste edible.
This comes back to the consumer again, doesn't it? Which of the consumers actually give thought to the amount of water, for example, that's needed to grow almonds for the almond milk? Forests being chopped down for your palm oil that goes into all of these vegetarian products. It's
staggering. Go to California and drive across the Central Valley and see the almond fields. You can drive for hundreds of miles. They are sucking water out of that water basin that relies on snow melt that someday won't come because of global warming. And you'll understand what almond milk and soya milk actually is. In Scotland, we can make human edible protein and fat, which is milk, from green grass. It grows with water that falls from the sky and grass that humans can't eat. Yet we insist if we're in fashion, in vogue and saving the planet, we drink soya milk. It's absolutely mental.
So in bite-sized chunks, this is not an easy question, Rory, so I'm not expecting a simple answer. In bite-sized chunks, what can we do? What can we all do? What can I do? I'm a consumer, I work in PR, you're a farmer, you're on various boards. People listening to this many of them will be rural inhabitants, many of them will be farmers. We've all got to take responsibility, but no single one of us can change the world.
Collectively
what
we can.
We do?
First of all, we need to look at our actions, stand back in a balcony and see what will really make an impact. Eating plant-based food will not nearly have the same impact as you changing your transportation habits, as making sure your house is insulated, as not getting on that aeroplane, as cycling to work, as not burdening society with your ill health because you've eaten the wrong food. You can decide to look at the food that you buy and make sure it's local, Make sure you're buying ingredients. Don't buy fast food, don't buy processed food. Learn to cook. Learn to cook with ingredients. Somebody will come back and say, oh, we can't afford it, it's so expensive, there's too much poverty. You're a wealthy farmer, Rory. There is nothing cheaper than vegetables. There is nothing cheaper than a potato. So yeah, eat plants, eat potatoes and good green vegetables. Eat a small amount of meat if you can afford it. Eat 80% vegetable, 20% meat. Eat a balanced diet, one that we maybe ate 50 years ago, not today. Everybody eats fillet steak now on a Saturday night. It used to be eaten. Well, many do, certainly in the farming circles.
Yes, yeah. I'd like
eat it
to,
once
occasionally.
People used to, you eat fillet steak. It was too expensive. You eat it at Christmas time.
Yeah.
But, if you're going to eat it, know where you've bought it. Know that the farmer's done his job right. And make sure, for goodness sake, it's Scottish first, British after that.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, we're not here to lecture other farmers, far from it. But what needs to be done within the wider Scottish agricultural industry then to try and address this?
Well, that's a big question, I guess, isn't it?
It is.
Well, first of all, we've got to stop thinking that somebody's going to provide us with an income. I suppose if I'm being controversial, we've got feather-bedded. Feather-bedded is the wrong word. We've used to having subsidy as part of our income. Farmers are very, very adaptable. Incredibly tough bunch who can survive challenge after challenge. They become very good very quickly at reading the signals and adjusting their behaviour accordingly. So when subsidy came along, that's exactly what they did. They said, this is the best way to make money for my family, because ultimately that's what they are. They are family people looking after their family. This is the best way to make money for my family, so that is what I will do. The signals are going to change, are changing, and have been for a while now. Relatively speaking, the amount of subsidy relative to the income that they generate by selling things is dropping. The big problem is that the value of the things they're selling is also dropping, so they're just getting less and less income. Government's got no money, tells you otherwise, they would definitely not be being truthful with you. There's going to be a new post-cap system of support come out. There won't be any money for it in reality, I'll tell you that now. They'll look at all sorts of things around the environment, but it'll be a tiny top-up.
Yeah.
And it won't provide enough for your family. So it's coming down the track. Great change. And Scotland has been trying to put off and gets caught up in the detail of less favoured area and Region 1 and Region 2 and the hills and rural depopulation. If the farmers came together and said, we're not going to rely upon government to sort it, we're going to sort it ourselves, faced the reality, looked at the options and made some decisions sooner rather than later. It's a terrible thing when people only make decisions because of fear. Fear is that we all need an incentive to make a change, and so often it's fear. We'll just keep doing it until the change is forced upon us, by which time it's too late. And then it's also somebody else's fault. As the big bad processor. It is these global giants. Yeah. As a combined force, farmers have huge sway, but because they continually work as individual businesses, measuring themselves against the success of their neighbour, not aspiring for more other than to be better than their neighbour, then they haven't got hope in hell. Haven't got a chance. Aspire for more, people. Aspire for better than what your neighbour's doing. And stop criticising those that try. Start really valuing success. Start backing the people who are really being successful instead of criticising them. People who create change and do things differently. Oh, it'll no work. It'll no work. Because they can't possibly have them work. Because if it works for them, it means that they're doing the wrong thing.
Yes, or they might have to change.
They might have to change. You have to take responsibility. And my brother and I have put in huge change in this business, and it might finish us off eventually. We've taken on huge debt, and we continually try to be better at what we do. We work exceptionally hard. It's hugely challenging some days, but at least we've taken the bull by the horns and are getting on with it. We've got to save our families, businesses, and to save our planet. Farmers have huge responsibility. It's going to be placed upon us regardless of whether we want it or not. So yeah, I think we need to take a stand back and have a look at what we're doing.
Well, thank you, Rory.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you. Wigtonshire dairy farmer and SAOS and Milk Suppliers Association board member Rory Christie. Thank you to Rory for a very wide-ranging chat and giving us plenty to think about, and thank you for listening. Please tweet us with the handle @on_farm UK. You can find us with that same handle on Instagram as well, to give us your thoughts about what you've been hearing and to share the episode with somebody who you might enjoy it. If you tweet us, we'll try and say thank you on air. It's the least we can do. Next time, we're talking some more about efforts to mitigate climate change, but this time with SAOS, Scotland's umbrella body for farming cooperatives. So we'll see you then.